Hello and welcome back once again to Belmont Bunch here in the great outdoors of Long Island. Today we're talking about the Eastern Conference round robin. That's like a phrase that I'm not used to because this never happens. Also, hockey in August doesn't happen. But here we are. We've got Boston and Tampa Bay, the first two teams we're going to be looking at. I don't have either of their jerseys or a Philly jersey, so that's why I'm wearing the Caps one. That doesn't mean I'm picking the Caps. So, start with Boston. You got to start with the perfection line. Bergeron wins every face-off. Pasternak close to 50 goals this year. Brad Marchand licked a man in the face earlier in the season. He's also up for the best sportsman of the year. How does this happen? That is one of the best lines in hockey. I think I've said that about the Colorado top line. Those two are kind of the two best lines in hockey. But pretty deep. Good three lines that I feel like they can run. Although there's experience enough on the fourth that it's not like they're running around with a bunch of kids. That was terrible. That is creepy. You got David Krejci, mid to late 30s at this point. I think he's 35, who's still pretty productive with Anders Bjork. Thank you. And Jake DeBrusk. Jake DeBrusk, who's looked pretty good. One of the picks that Boston took ahead of Barzal. Not quite working out in that regard in comparing him to Barzal. But DeBrusk, good NHLer in his own right. He's a nice sniper. Yeah, pretty good player. Kasha, Coyle, Corrali. Coyle last year was a great acquisition for Boston, and having three good centers down the middle to start your lineup is a pretty good setup. Kasha, it feels like we're just constantly waiting for him to break out. Maybe he'll do it at the side of Charlie Coyle in the playoffs. And Sean Corrali's got some playoff experience as well now after last year's run and was fairly productive in the playoffs. So three good lines there. And then you've got Nordstrom, Lindholm, and Islander legend Chris Wagner played half a season for us. Not even. It's a fourth line. It's a fourth line that exists, but it's got experience, so in the playoffs, sometimes you get surprises out of that fourth line. Defensively, very strong. You've got Charlie McAvoy, who's basically pulling Zdeno Chara along with him at this point, because Zdeno Chara is not quite what he used to be, but that's what happens when you're 43 years old, or 42. So Charlie McAvoy, the Long Island kid, in his early 20s, and he's from Long Beach.
What was his home address again?
I don't have that, but I have Social Security.
Oh, okay.
You've got Torrey Krug, one of the better offensive defensemen in the league, and he's a great power play quarterback, which is why that power play is as strong as it is. Brandon Carlo, pretty decent defenseman. Redundant. And then the bottom pairing is not bad. You've got Grzelcyk, who has a little bit of speed and some offensive capability in his game, which is nice to get a little bonus out of a third pairing defenseman. And you've got Colin Miller, who's currently injured, but Lauzon, and you've got Connor Clifton, who scored in the Stanley Cup Finals last year, Quinnipiac grad, another quick defenseman who can score. So pretty well-rounded defensive group. You've got some defensive defensemen, you've got some guys that can put up points, good bounce. And you got in goal, great tandem, one of the best in the league this year in Tuukka Rask and Jaro Halak, who has had a wonderful resurgence after his last year with the Islanders. And yeah, Boston, just a good team. That being said, stats-wise, one of the more potent offenses we already talked about. Power play has a ton of skill offensively and on the blue line. Penalty kill is really strong. That's an important thing. Last year in the Stanley Cup Final, they were scoring a ton of power play goals on the Blues. And it basically, you have to be as disciplined as possible when you play Boston because they're going to punish you on the power play. Goals against, the best defensive team in the league, and they were one of the better offensive teams. They were the best team in the league. As you can see, the only team that hit 100 points with still 10 games to go. So, yeah, Boston's kind of a juggernaut. Going in, they look like it's cup or bust for them. That being said, that's good for Boston. Time to look at Tampa Bay. Ready? All right. Tampa Bay was a team that experienced extreme pain last year, being the best team in the league by a mile, and then getting swept by the 8th seed. This year, they started off pretty rough, but they really got going as the season progressed, probably putting that playoff loss in the rear view and actually maybe the opposite, maybe using it for inspiration, because they were playing great. But there's a little bit of a worry because of an injury. Steven Stamkos was injured in practice the other day. He is up in the air. He always seems to get hurt, so he's always kind of up in the air when it comes to this. But even if that happens, they're a pretty deep offensive group. You've got Braden Point, who's just been a breakout star. You've got Nikita Kucherov, who's constantly one of the better scorers in the league. You've got Palat. Cirelli's a great two-way center, so he's good offensively, he's good defensively. Alex Kaloran's got playoff experience. He's played in the Stanley Cup. You've got Blake Coleman, who's coming off a 20-goal year last year, who's very good depth on that third line. Tyler Johnson, a lot of experience, playoff experience, still pretty productive, even though they're probably going to try to get out of his cap soon. Barclay Goodrow, the last piece in what they needed. They traded a first-round pick for a guy that has 8 goals. Why? But he's a decent player, decent enough player, I guess. He scored the game-winning goal in that crazy Vegas Game 7 last year for the Sharks. You've got Pat Maroon, a lot of experience as well, Stanley Cup winner. Yes, he is. Cedric Paquette, who's a good fourth-line center, and Yanni Gourde, who's been kind of disappointing, and that's a contract that they might try to get out from too. 30 points this year, a little bit disappointing for a guy that was closer to the 40-50 point threshold previously. So yeah, but it's deep enough that, you know, one of those guys gets going, like Gourde, Coleman, Johnson, Killorn. There's enough depth to maybe survive Steven Stamkos' injury a little bit. Defensively, you've got one of the best in the game in Victor Hedman. Jan Ruda, who is fine defensively. Ryan McDonough, still fairly productive. He's getting a little bit older, but he's still pretty good. Chernak, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but he's a big, hulking dude. Seems to be a pretty decent enough defensive defenseman. You've got a really, really offensively inclined bottom pairing there in Mikhail Sergachev, Kevin Shattenkirk, who's had a nice bounce back over the last year or two. Tampa Bay gave him a shot. He's been pretty productive. They have a very solid group defensively that produces a decent amount. They're very similar to Boston. Andrei Vasilevsky in net, very solid. In the playoffs last year, a little bit scary, but the whole team was kind of like that. So, and it was his first time as a starter in the playoffs. So, kind of toss it out for now. If he's bad again, we'll bring it back and talk about how he's bad in the playoffs, because people get reputations. Curtis McElhinney, though, should Vasilevsky struggle, Curtis McElhinney, as a car comes, Curtis McElhinney knocked the Islanders out last year. Peter Mrazek started that series, got hurt. Curtis McElhinney shut the Islanders down. He's a little bit older, but he's still got some game left in him. So it's good to have a good backup goalie, because you never know, you know, especially in short series like we're going to have. Not in the first round, well, in the first round, but not in the round robin. But it's good to have that backup to fall back on. There are some teams that don't have good backups, and basically if their starter gets hurt, they're done. But both of these teams are okay in that regard. Okay, stats-wise, yes, one of the best offenses in the league. Yes, one of the best power plays in the league. Yes, a good penalty kill. And the goals against, pretty solid. Like we said, like I've said multiple times over the years, the year.
I've said it too. So.
Do you know what I'm going to say though? I didn't say it yet.
Oh yeah, the goals against, one of the best, right? Yeah, that's what you're going to say.
So what I was going to say is scoring is up around the league, so 277 is actually pretty solid. Good to know you've been listening. But that's it for Boston and Tampa. Tampa Bay, these are two very similar teams. Well-rounded offensively, well-rounded defensively, with a good starter and backup. So they're both very solid teams. Both of these teams should be cup or bust. But that being said, let's go to Washington and Philly. Or milk jump again?
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, let's move on to the Capitals and Philly. Ready? All right, so Washington. also known as the team that killed Lubomir Vishnevsky. You have Alexander Ovechkin, who's this decent kid. I don't know if you've heard of him, on the left wing of the first line. The flying, the screeching eagle in Evgeny Kuznetsov. He does the celebration where he goes. Tom Wilson, everybody's favorite player because he's suspended every 5 minutes. Jacob Vrana had a nice breakout year. I should also say for Tom Wilson, capable scorer for a guy that's also an enforcer, so I'll give him credit there. Nicholas Backstrom, one of the most underrated playmakers of our generation. Usually playing with Ovechkin, but Kuznetsov, another Russian, has stolen his job. TJ Oshie, still pretty effective sniper, so him and Vrana, pretty solid snipers on that second line for Nicholas Backstrom. Third line, Lars Eller has fit really well with the Caps since coming over a few years ago from the Canadiens. Is going to be flanked by Ilya Kovalchuk, playing for, I think, league minimum or something like that, and Carl Hagelin. Good experience all around there. So great top nine. And then Richard Panik at the Disco, who, that was my fantasy name a few years ago, struggled after having a very productive year. I caught it with the Capitals. With the Arizona Coyotes. I got thrown off by catching a fly. You've got Nick Dowd, effective fourth liner. Garnett Hathaway, who's got a fun name, and he's an enforcer / grinder type. So a little bit of sandpaper on that fourth. A little bit of sandpaper on the first. Either way, Kempny and Carlson. Kempny's an important part of their lineup. Very underrated. Carlson, amongst the best offensive defensemen in general in the league, might win the Norris this year. Had an amazing start. At one point had a 100-point pace as a defenseman. Brendan Dillon, who came over in a midseason trade with Dmitry Orlov, who is also a pretty effective offensive defenseman in his own right. Huge bug. What was it? Oh, I was going to make a joke about this is the Washington team and it's been invaded by Russians. You've got Jonas Siegenthaler. I don't know where he's from. He's just got a fun name. With Nick Jensen. Jensen also came over, I think, last year. Both of them fine. Siegenthaler pretty young, so it's nice to have Nick Jensen beside him to give him some experience. And then in net, it's an interesting story in net. Braden Holtby, who appears to be on the decline, whose numbers were not that great this year, and Ilya Samsonov, which is another Russian on this team. Samsonov, I've heard different announcers say it differently, but really outperformed. It's kind of a similar situation to the Rangers, where it's the young Russian kind of stealing the older player's job. And, these Russians stealing American jobs, although they're really Canadian jobs, really, if you're going to be honest. Yes, I actually think Samsonov, Holtby has... If he starts game one, Holtby has, he's got just holding on to his job. He gives up one bad goal, and I think Samsonov goes in. But yeah, their stats, prolific offense, pretty good power play. Maybe you'd expect it to be a little bit higher with the offensive firepower they have and the playmakers they have. Penalty kill, very solid. They have a decent defensive core. Goaltending, that goals against... obviously, that's not all goaltending. That goals against is a little bit high for a team of their caliber, and it was a little bit last year too. And it sank them against Carolina because they were giving up too many goals. And Braden Holtby, if he struggles, Samsonov has to go in there because they have to have a quick trigger finger. It's a short playoff this year. You got to be quick on the decisions. Their flaw is that they've been giving up too many goals, which feels maybe that's Trotz leaving. They were a defensively stalwart team. They've been a little bit more lackadaisical defensively since then. But that being said, now it is time to talk about the Philadelphia Flyers.
Tom? What'd you... Tom?
What you looking for? All right, so it's time to talk about Philly. Philadelphia, who was right on top of Washington in the standings, not literally, yeah, they were neck and neck, whatever. They weren't on top of them. Washington was on top. Let's start this part over. All right, so Philly, we have Claude Giroux, great playmaker, getting up there in age, but he's still showing point-wise. Sean Couturier, who played, I think he played on a torn ACL, either last year or the year before in the playoffs, 2 years ago in the playoffs. Yeah, that guy's a warrior, and he's a good two-way defenseman, two-way forward as well. Jakub Voracek, point totals, I think we're a little bit down this year, but still a good playmaker. You've got, on the second line, Kevin Hayes, who got that ridiculous contract, but he's played pretty well, so justifying it a little bit, still kind of scary, and it's an albatross, but Joel Farabee, prospect, got his shot because of a lot of injuries, which we will talk about. Travis Konechny, great guy, great bud, great player, one of those guys. He looks like he could break that 30 to 35 goal threshold a lot of years, especially when he's playing with either Couturier or Hayes. Could play some top line minutes if Voracek isn't as good, and that might actually be good. You get a sniper to play with, a couple of two-way forward and a playmaker, and mix it up a little bit. The bottom six is a little bit nervy right now because, as we know with Oscar Lindblom, we're all, Oscar's strong. He had been dealing with a cancer diagnosis and, has been at least practicing, which is amazing, which, obviously is an amazing step. But it's still kind of up there whether or not it's going to be possible for him to play. The website that we use with these lineups, at least, as a guiding, thing, because we don't exactly put the lines that they do. Not Puckpedia. Daily Face-Off. They're paired together. But they had Ivan Provorov playing left wing on the third line. Guess what? He's also their top defenseman. Don't think he's doing both. That was probably emergency basis. Scott Lawton is fine. Michael Raffles, fine. Grant had a pretty good year. Derek Grant. Tyler Pitlick is fine. This guy, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm going to call him AK because it's a cool nickname. Gratata. I'm so old. But he's a prospect that they've called up. We'll see how he does. But yeah, that bottom six is a little bit worrisome going into the playoffs because Nolan Patrick, head injuries, Lindblom, obviously. Yeah, so not a ton. Got a little bit of experience, but not great production. Defensively, you've got Provorov, who's been pretty solid now for a few years, paired with Matt Niskanen, who came over in the summer, and he's done pretty well defensively. Sanheim and Myers, Philippe Myers, they've both been fairly decent. Sanheim has been considered one of their better defensemen. Haig and Braun, defensive defensemen, just to fill out the bottom pairing. Altogether, when you have Carter Hart, that helps. He does the opposite of when the defense in a Barry Trotz system insulates the goalie. He insulates the defense because he's so good, Carter Hart. Brian Elliott, a little bit shaky, getting up there in age. Got to hope that Hart doesn't get hurt. But at least Elliott's got some experience, so that's something. The goals against was good, pretty decent this year. Penalty kill, pretty decent this year. Power play, pretty good. And the goals for, pretty good. So they're just like a pretty solid team across the board that maybe lacks a little bit of that depth that is important in the playoffs, but we also see no names appear in the playoffs, and that's literally a no name at the moment. So we'll see. Here's a goal by No Face, or No Name, whatever. All right, with all that being said, it's me, Mario. Hi. It's time to reveal the order that I think the round robin will finish in. All right, let's start with number 4. Number four. Philly. A little bit of questions of depth. I think there's like kind of a tier when it comes to these 4 teams, and it goes, Boston, Tampa, own tier, Washington. So that kind of gives away what the next one is. That is Washington. So Washington's strength over...
Oh God, they know!
Washington's strength over Philly is a little bit more depth. Definitely more depth when it comes to the forward group. And in goal, having that backup plan to, where Carter Hart, the backup is Brian Elliott, a little bit worrisome. So we'll skip to number 1. and it is Boston. Tampa here in second.
Wait, Tom, did you forget to put them in the order of the prediction? Because that's just the same order you went through them.
So anyway, yes, I asked James to leave, and now I'm just filming in my backyard in the dark with nobody else here. But so what's going to give Boston the edge is crazy amount of depth, crazy amount of experience. Steven Stamkos, the question mark that is Steven Stamkos, kind of brings Tampa back down to 2, but they still have enough depth and structure that I think, they're a little bit ahead of Washington because their goals against is a little bit better. But we'll see. I think Washington has the potential, if Samsonov plays and he plays really well, to jump Tampa. That's kind of the one area that I'm looking at for that. I know Philly was hot at the end of the season, but momentum means nothing now. So, we'll see. They were well coached this year. Alain Vigneault came over, did a great job. If he continues that, Philly is going to be a problem. All these teams are going to be problems for whoever they play in round 2. But it is guaranteed they will play in round 2. And this is what I've got for the round robin. So that's it. Like and subscribe. Comment below. Yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. So we'll see you next time. We got the jersey videos on their way.
That's just a theory.
Oh, this might be a boring one though. My initial feeling is Boston, Tampa Bay, Washington. The exact way that it, yeah. So that's Boston.
And who's Clifton?
Clifton, I already said.
Did you? Oh, I don't pay attention. So now, yeah. Whenever.
All right. Leave that in. It's the Winnipeg Jets. I go to start talking police sirens.
Yeah.
We'll like put a thing.
Yeah.
That says.
Is now a popular time for airplanes?